Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we're going to attempt to saddle the giant sandworms with a spoiler-free review of the highly anticipated Dune, not to be confused with David Lynch's 1984 film. This one is the 2021 version from writer-director Denis Villeneuve, and then we'll also have a spoiler-filled discussion of the plot, along with some of the film's themes, because, hey, this movie's got a lot on its mind. And I do want to note for listeners as well, in the spoiler section, we will just be spoiling everything in the context of Dune Part 1, the 2021 film. We will not be spoiling the second half of David Lynch's 1984 film, nor are we going to be spoiling anything from the novel. Now, with that said, one does not take over a rival house on their own. They have to summon the Imperium. They have to make a deal, create some bargains. So, with that, I'm so excited to welcome the special guest we have around the table today. First up, we are welcoming back returning guest from our last review, Dalton Stuart from the GoodTrash Genrecast. Dalton, welcome back to the Cinematic Schematic.
Great to be back. The last one must have gone well enough that my cries to be able to speak about Melange were heard. Thanks, buddy.
It was actually just the spices that you gave me after the last review. You gave me a lot of it.
I am usually holding spice.
And I'm also super excited to welcome back. It's been a hot minute. Via what, 2020?
Yeah.
Dead Center Film Festival?
A long time.
Way too long. I am so excited to welcome back the managing editor over at No Film School, also contributor at the Cinematropolis, Joe Light. Joe, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And last, but certainly not least, I'm very thrilled to be welcoming an actual sandworm. One could argue he lets the spice flow through him each and every day. Friend, contributor at the Cinematropolis and World Lit Today, Daniel Bokemper. Daniel, you survived the Snyder Cut discussion just in time for Dune.
Great. Yeah, hell yeah.
Sorry, that was me introducing myself in Sadakar throat singing. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me. I did survive and even enjoyed the Snyder Cut of Justice League, so I'm happy to be back here.
If listeners want to hear us having a 4.5 hour discussion, no, JK, it was only about 2.5 hour discussion of the Snyder Cut. You can check out Daniel Bokemper's last appearance on the Cinematic Schematic in March, where we talked about Zack Snyder's Justice League. What a movie. What a movie. Now, before we get into today's review, I did just want to quickly note, listeners, that if you're listening to the show today and you've enjoyed the conversation, the best way that you can support the show is by subscribing or following via your preferred podcast app, especially Apple, which is still the top dog in the podcast space. You can leave us a rating or a review. Would be very helpful. Help us get discovered by other listeners like yourself. And also say, if you want to hit us up on social media, you can follow us on Twitter at the Cinematrop or head over to facebook.com/the Cinematropolis. Now, it's been a hot minute, so we actually took a little bit of a hiatus, listeners. The last review we actually did with Dalton here was the Suicide Squad back in August, and I'm super excited to just make a more formal announcement that after taking an early fall hiatus, moving home, changing day jobs, all that fun stuff, that we're going to be back on schedule, and we're aiming for 2 in-depth discussions a month. So, again, all sorts of goodies that you will find when you subscribe to the podcast. Now, with that said, all the housekeeping out of the way, I want listeners to get to know each of you a little bit better. So we're going to start with a little icebreaker question today. And the question I've come up with here is actually related to Dune. Because this film, I don't know if you guys noticed, is filled with so many wonderful names. They're very creative. Duncan, Idaho is a great one. We get the House Atrieus, an epic name. And who is the lead character? Not Leto. No, Paul Atrieus. Or maybe even characters like Lady Jessica, So, I don't know. I found it funny to have all these really incredible, creative sci-fi sounding names, and then the main character's name is Paul. So with that said, I want to go around the table to hear what your Dune names would be. And Daniel Bokemper, I'm going to start with you.
So this one isn't very original, but in the second season of What We Do in the Shadows, there's an episode where one of the main vampires, Laszlo, is trying to evade a debt to another vampire that's like $20. So naturally he escapes the state and goes and lives elsewhere. And he assumes the name Jackie Daytona, normal human bartender. And I feel like Jackie Daytona could totally be one of Duncan, Idaho's warriors. So I like that. I may also go with like Floyd, Iowa, or Johnny, Kansas. But this one isn't really a name, but the Kwisatz Haderach. I know that's more of like a concept, but that's a really fun word to say. So I feel like croissant side of ranch would maybe be mine.
You just said like 4 names at me. Which one did you just pick, Daniel?
Which one's the best?
Did you pick the croissant?
I don't know. I can't pick the croissant one. Probably croissant side of ranch. My favorite meal.
Okay. So now maybe I should have changed the game. Maybe we should have done. Is it a Dune name or a porn name? I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, it could really
both,
go.
really.
I mean, Thufir Hawat could really go either way.
Oh man, you gotta. Oh my gosh.
What a name!
How do you pronounce that name? Go one more time.
With confidence.
Yes.
Thufir Hawat. I'm not going to do it again.
I did not. Okay. That character just does not exist to me.
So Daniel is a man of many names. You got to pick one, Daniel.
The croissant.
Okay, the croissant
Side of ranch.
Croissant side of ranch.
You gotta say the whole thing.
Croissant side of ranch. All right. Joe Light, what is your Dune name?
I really like that episode of What We Do in the Shadows, by the way. I was talking about this with my husband, and we were joking that I could be like the femme version of Keanu Reeves' character in like the Dune universe, where he was in Point Break. I could just be the Johnny Utah of like of like the Dune universe.
You know, Johnny Utah would fit right in to
Yeah.
Dune, basically.
Duncan, Idaho, Johnny Utah.
Oh my God. Dalton Stewart, you got to top Johnny Utah, man. He's your boy Keanu.
I love him. How do you feel about Worm Spiceman?
Worm Spiceman. See, that's appropriate because it's just on the nose enough to feel like it fits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just in the realm of Dune enough.
I like it because with a lot of the genre films, it's like they run out of names and they either get really lazy like Lady Jessica or they get really on the nose. Either way, it's still part of the charm, I think. I am gonna go with Jackson, Minnesota, not to be confused with there probably is a Jackson, Minnesota somewhere, but I just was like name generator. What's a random like kind of like strong last name? Make that the first name, and then go with the state in the United States of America. So Jackson, Minnesota.
That's a guy.
Someone out there has that name.
That's a guy. Yeah.
I didn't want to spoil the sequel, but Duncan, Idaho actually has a brother, guys. And okay, well, this has been a lot of fun, listeners. And maybe you have a Dune name that you would like to share with the Cinematic Schematic. You can let us know by tweeting at us at the Cinematrop on Twitter, or hitting us up on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematropolis, or emailing us thecinematropolis@gmail.com. All right, but let's get on to the main event here. Let's dive into our spoiler-free review of Dune Part 1.
My planet Arrakis is so beautiful when the sun is low. Rolling over the sands, you can see spice in the air. The outsiders ravage our lands in front of our eyes. Their cruelty to my people is all I've known. What's to become of our world?
A boy.
Hey, Duncan, can I trust you with something?
Yes, always. You know that.
I've been having dreams about a girl on Arrakis. I don't know what it means.
Dreams make good stories. But everything important happens when we're awake. Hey, you. Put on some muscle?
I did?
No.
Now, according to IMDb, Dune is described as a feature adaptation of Frank Herbert's science fiction novel about the son of a noble family entrusted with the protection of the most valuable asset and most vital element in the galaxy. Man, I hate IMDb synopsis. Sometimes they're home runs, and sometimes it's like they just like had a bot create it for them.
Yeah.
They describe the novel sort of. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is Dune Part 1. I want to stop here because we are going to be talking about part 1 again because, surprise, if you're listening to this and haven't seen it in the theater yet, you probably don't know that it's Dune Part 1. We're going to get into that more in the discussion. Now, with that said, I want listeners to know a little bit more about our relationship. Obviously, there's a popular novel that the film is based on, as well as David Lynch's 1984 film. So, Dalton, Stuart, to give us a little more context here, could you tell us exactly a little bit about your relationship with Dune heading into Dune Part 1?
Yeah, I'm a recent convert to the majesty that is Shai-Hulud. I just recently got into Dune, but I liked it a lot. Yeah. In anticipation of this film, I read the novel. I listened to the novel, let's be honest, this last year, and man, did I really like it. And I tried to jump immediately into Dune Messiah, which is not something I would recommend. It's a little too dense to do back to back. But I am now back into Dune Messiah. I've seen bits and pieces of the Lynch Dune, but I have not seen it all the way through. But yeah, a recent discovery for me, but have really been enjoying going into Frank Herbert's weird little world.
Excellent. I think that's that sounds like a very healthy relationship with Dune, because if you've watched the entire David Lynch film, I wonder if you were currently living in a fever dream. We'll get to more of that
Now,
later.
I do love the first half hour of that movie, which
It's
I've
great.
seen a few times, and boy, do they get some of the weirder stuff from the books.
Oh, yeah.
Right out front and center.
Oh, man. Joe Light, turn to you. What is your relationship with Dune?
I have to say that I had not interacted with it in a very deep fashion before watching Villeneuve's Dune at all. Like, I had kind of been familiar with aspects of Lynch's Dune, but I will say that now TikTok is serving me up a lot of Dune content. Like, I'm seeing a lot of Lynch clips that I've never seen before, and kind of comparing it now with the new version of Dune, and seeing a lot of like explainer videos that I didn't even know that I needed, in terms of like, why aren't there computers in Dune and things like that. So getting more, I think, into the mythology and the world building now after having seen the film, but before then really had not experienced a lot of it at all.
So you went in totally fresh. You didn't know a lot about the novel or the previous film.
Yeah, I hadn't read it at all or anything.
It's fantastic. Fresh perspective there. Daniel Bokemper, what is your relationship with Dune?
Yeah, kind of similar to Dalton's, actually. I read Dune, I believe, in anticipation of this film in 2018 for the first time. Definitely enjoyed it. I also didn't watch David Lynch's version of Dune until shortly thereafter. But I had seen like bits and pieces throughout my childhood and thought it was cool. I just didn't know it was, a movie. Like in its entirety, I always thought it was just like a television series or something like that. And then rediscovering it later in life. I do enjoy Lynch's version, knowing it's not like particularly good. I think it's super imaginative and a really good example of how not to adapt something. But yeah, I would say fringe. I haven't read anything beyond the first Dune, but I did have the entirety of the series spoiled for me on a 4-hour YouTube binge. So,
as one does,
right?
Really, in the year 2021. I think my experiences are similar. So I read the novel when I was 15. So it's been 15 years, dating myself a little bit, since I've read it. So I didn't read past the first novel, but I had a good friend who had read all of them that were out at that time. I think his son was still putting out more sequels at that time, or spinoffs at that point in time. So I know like the gist of, I know the first novel, it's real fuzzy, and I know the gist of kind of like the larger series, but it's funny. David Lynch's Dune, I don't know if I've ever watched it start to finish. I have seen the first half of it many times. And I've seen the second half of it a couple of times when it is like, because that was one of those movies that would play on the Sci-Fi Channel all the time when I was a kid. So I catch bits and pieces of it. And recently, me and my girlfriend Lauren turned it on just to see. And sure enough, I made it about 45 minutes in before I passed out. And I was like, I already feel like I'm in a fever dream. It's just such a interesting film. I actually admire it for its weirdness.
Oh, yeah.
But it's certainly not, I don't know if I'd say good movie.
Yeah, probably not.
David Lynch himself has disavowed himself from that film.
Does he still do that?
Yeah, it's like he hates it when people bring it up. Apparently, he just feels real bad about the whole thing.
What an old shit. Just own it. Own your mistakes. Come on.
It's okay. We got Twin Peaks: The Return. David Lynch got to keep making the stuff he wanted. Okay, so listeners, now that you know a little bit about our perspectives here, I also want to beg the question, how did we all see Dune? Times are complicated. Some people don't feel comfortable going to the theater, which is perfectly fine. Some people are out and about. I know this movie in particular, much like Christopher Nolan movies have historically been marketed as you must see it in the theater or you haven't seen the movie. So I just want to get some perspective around the table about what our experience was with the movie. So Joe, how did you see this film?
I have to say, unfortunately, I watched it at home, even though I'm not super proud of that. I would have preferred to see it in IMAX. I would have preferred to see it in a theater because I'm kind of a purist that way. But at the time right now, I'm just so busy that thankfully it being on HBO Max, I opted for that and kind of like was able to pause it and do my work and come and go. And I know that's not the perfect way to see that. And I actually hate that I saw it that way. But that's how I watched it, unfortunately, at home on HBO Max.
Hey, that's okay. You gotta do what you gotta do in the year 2021.
I know, but I am, again, as I said, a purist, and I know that IMAX is so beautiful, and that's how my husband saw it, and I'm really jealous. So I will go and watch it again in IMAX as soon as I can.
You've got 1 week until Eternals kicks it out. I know. I'm sure it'll come back, though. I feel like that's one of those, kind of like the Dark Knight. They randomly bring it back when they need something to fill the IMAX screens. Yeah.
Nothing would make me happier than to see Dune kick Eternals out of IMAXs.
It'd be the best thing. It'd be the best. I actually secretly hope that happens. Yes. Dalton Stewart, how about you?
I caught a matinee 4DX, which I had never seen before.
4DX?
Yeah, so I got
you
to
smelled the spice.
I smelled the spice.
Oh my God.
I went home with my shirt stinking of spice. Look, I mean, Joe, to your point, it's hard to go see a movie, especially when it's almost 3 hours long. You got to build your whole damn day around going to see Dune, which is why I didn't see it at IMAX. There just weren't any showtimes that worked out. So I saw 4DX, which, I don't know, I can see hating it. I wouldn't blame anybody for hating it, but that was fun. It's a novel way to watch a movie. It's not something I'd make a habit of.
Did you ride the sandworm?
Well, I mean, I don't know. We can't get into spoilers here, Caleb.
I mean, there's sandworms in the movie, and you're okay, fine.
Note how Caleb at the start of this said "saddle the sandworm" and then "spoiler free" in the same sentence. Really, the same phrase.
Listen, you guys are taking my joke way too literally. Okay. Oh man, spoilers for part 2. All right, so Daniel Bokemper, how did you go about seeing Dune?
Shamelessly at home, shamelessly at home on my desktop computer with its terrible speakers. I don't think the quality of a film is defined by how you see it, just as long as you do see it. But I will admit that Dune especially probably does benefit from the IMAX experience, especially we'll get into how it presents a sense of scope. And I really think, I probably did miss a little bit of that at the at-home experience, but do what you got to do. And I'm pro access, so I'm glad it's accessible. I do feel like, similar to Joe, I do feel like I'm missing just a little bit. But I don't know. Now that Dalton describes the 4D experience and smelling Dune, I really
That's the way to go.
Try. I know.
I'll spoil it for you. It mostly smells like cinnamon and industrial cleaner. But
that's good. That's good. I'm for that.
I was pretty into it.
So did you have the chairs that?
Yes, that's what 4DX is. The chairs that move.
You didn't like the chairs?
No, I did like the chairs.
Okay,
I'm just saying, I also don't need to get beat up during the fight scenes. Which, if it had done it the whole time, it would have been a nice, relaxing massage. But it's just every once in a while I'm getting shot in the kidneys. Like, what's happening?
I've heard that the sound is really in your face too.
I didn't really notice it. It's definitely not like Dolby Atmos intense with the sound.
Did it get real wild when Duncan Idaho hugs Paul?
I wish I had been hugged more tightly by the chair at that moment. Yeah, one of the many good Space Daddy hugs in this movie.
Right. There's so many good Space Daddy hugs, and just so much great Jason Momoa in this movie. In fact. Mm-hmm. A little bit of Jason Momoa goes a long way.
It does.
What about you, Caleb? How did you see this beautiful film?
I watched it the way Denis Villeneuve intended on my iWatch.
On your fucking phone?
You are cheating yourself.
Chloe Zhao is in
You may
too.
think you experienced the film.
No, you mentioned the Dolby Atmos. I saw it at the Dolby Theater at the Quail Springs,
nice.
which is which was great. I think what I want to hone in on here is, Daniel, I think you're spot on. I don't think a movie is better or worse. The movie itself is not better or worse how you watch it. The experience is definitely different. You notice things, and there's obviously a lot of care that was put into all the details of this film that pop a little more. Hans Zimmer's score, nothing beats a Hans Zimmer score with the sound. It's pretty incredible. So it was great. The experience was great. You know, there were scenes where I don't know if you guys have been in a Dolby theater, but when the bass starts rumbling, you feel like you're on a rocket ship or something like that. I'm too tall for those seats though, so they do get a little uncomfortable after 2 hours and 40 minutes. My legs get a little crunched in there, but no, it was great. But I got to see it on the big screen. I kind of want to do the 4D version though, so I can do some comparison. I want to know if I can like see and feel Oscar Isaac's beard and really experience
being told all you need to be is my son. Yeah, that's all I need.
Oh, the dream.
The dream.
It's fun. 4DX is fun. I didn't have to watch it in 3D either, which I was a little bit worried about. I would have to do. Yeah, it was 2D, which was perfect.
Is it just me? This is a whole other podcast probably. But I'm just going to throw this question out there. Has post-pandemic been less 3D than pre-pandemic? Because it certainly seems that way.
I feel like it was before. It was like 2018, 2019. I feel like that
tapering
really
off.
started tapering off. Yeah.
Was Dune in 3D? I didn't know that was an option.
It's got a handful of 3D showtimes, I think.
Oh, really? Huh.
I didn't even know that.
I didn't either.
I could be wrong on that entirely.
I wouldn't be surprised though. I mean,
I thought I saw one. But
you had to sell that $165 million budget to Warner Brothers somehow.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so listeners, now you know how we watched it. You see our biases. Let's just get down to business here. What did we all think of Dune? And Joe, I'm actually going to start with you because you came into this something of a Dune virgin, one could say, cleansed of any sort of bias other than that you know that Denis Villeneuve made the movie. So tell us, what were your thoughts on Dune?
I will say that we did put out an explainer post that I had to edit, so I was sort of semi-familiar with the politics and the themes of the film going in. So I don't know if that influenced how I felt about the film overall, but I do think that I really, at the end of the day, liked it a lot. I really liked the kind of big concepts that were explored in the story. I think that with any like sci-fi epic, and the only thing that I really have to compare it to is Hyperion, which I don't know if anyone here has read, which is like a huge sci-fi universe that they're trying to adapt, and they've been trying to adapt for many years. I think Bradley Cooper is actually really passionate about that story, but with any like huge sci-fi story that's set thousands of years in the future, there's so much to cover, and I think that this film is really long, it's really involved, and there's a lot to cover, but I think that they do it really, really well, and I was engaged the whole time, and I felt the emotion of a lot of the things that they were trying to convey, especially with, I mean, Paul's arc is compelling, I think, no matter how much knowledge you come into the film with. So, yeah, I really, really liked it at the end of the day, and I think that it's a really good adaptation and visually stunning. I mean, I don't think that anyone can fault the cinematography and the scope of everything that they were trying to do. So yeah, at the end of the day, I was really, really impressed and excited. Thankfully that they got the part 2 greenlit in the last couple of days. So yeah, I'm excited to definitely see the next part of what they put together.
Excellent. So overall, we've got a thumbs up. Daniel Bokemper, what were your thoughts on Dune Part 1?
Yeah, really close to Joe's. Actually, I enjoyed it. I think it's a worthy rendition of its source. I think in a lot of ways too, it's kind of a reminder. This is going to sound really cliche and hokey and maybe a little sappy, but it reminds us of what cinema is capable of. It's like if you can really capture Dune in the way that this film does, it's hard to imagine what stories we can't tell in film. So I like it for that. I alluded to the scope being a reason to see it in IMAX, or I imagine a reason to see it in IMAX. I have not seen it in IMAX, but the sense of scope. I think it does something that a lot of films, maybe especially like blockbuster films, have a hard time kind of easing back on, which is just let things be silent. I think this film does a way better. It has a really good method, I guess, And not that it's entirely original at parts. It made me think of like 2001: A Space Odyssey in the sense you just feel very small and kind of microscopic, not in a bad way, but it really establishes that when you see those silent, hovering, massive spacecrafts and you're just kind of lingering in that environment. That's something the film does exceptionally well and exceedingly well. Hans Zimmer's score, of course, helps that, from the bagpipes to the Sardaukar throat singing. There's a lot going on, and the score definitely lends itself to that. I would say the pacing is good for how close of an adaptation it is. It's appropriate. It does kind of lends itself to a minor criticism I have of the film that we'll dig into a little bit later, but otherwise I do think it's appropriate. And I think the portrayals of some of the characters, especially Oscar Isaac's Leto and Stellan Skarsgård's Baron, are incredible. Those are very exceptional. And then I think just overall stylistically, Villeneuve's paints a very beautiful picture of Dune, and I think he breathes a lot of life into Arrakis that I think, unfortunately, Lynch and all of his creative brilliance maybe didn't quite capture. Maybe because he didn't have the technology for it.
Yeah, they were 1984 was a lot different than 2021.
Exactly. So no, not a real slight, but overall, I liked it. I'm very glad this film is the way it is, because it could have gone very, very, very south. We should probably mention this book has been called Unadaptable several times. In the past. So mission accomplished.
Despite somebody taking a swing at it.
Tried really hard. That's the thing about Lynch's movie. It's ambitious. But
movie exists. Movie happened. Adapted.
Yeah, unfilmable.
Yeah, it happened.
Filmed.
It was filmed.
Done.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, Dalton, Stuart, let's turn to you. What did you think of Dune?
Movie big, Caleb. I love it. It's so good. Oh my God, it's beautiful. The production design on this movie. Are you kidding me? It's brutalist and gothy and mythic, and it feels special and important. Like, again, it is. It can't come across as corny or hokey, but like Dad said, yeah, it makes you go, movies. I love these things. With the pictures and the sound, come on. I liked it so much. Like, I'm almost immediately started watching chunks of it again. Like, I think that night or maybe the next day, I went ahead and opened up HBO Max. I was like, well, let's watch a few more parts of this movie again. Yeah, it's spectacular. There's things I don't like about it, but that's like, very quibbly. Denis been thinking about making a Dune movie longer than I have, obviously, but there's some stuff that's just like, well, there's some stuff I'd have liked to have seen. There's some themes that I would have liked to have spent more time with, but as Joe alluded to, like, the emotions in this movie do not get lost, and I feel like that's such a, Dune, for all of its politicking and people thinking and trying to outmaneuver and outsmart each other, it is a lot of very emotions forward story, and I think that gets captured really well. I mean, oh my gosh, Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson. There we go. My brain failed me for a second. Rebecca Ferguson just throwing heat this whole movie.
She's so good.
Dude, just with her face, just like the littlest things communicate. And that's so much of Dune is people's internal monologues or them thinking about what other people might be thinking about. And the movie so successfully gets this cast just dialed in. That you are getting those nuances of performance in really small ways. In a movie that's not talky. Like, again, a book full of dialogue is mostly experiential, which I think is a hell of a challenge to take such a dense text and make it all about sound and visuals. That's very impressive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's one thing. I'm really glad you pointed that out, because one thing that Lynch's film fell victim to was just long exposition dumps that were inside someone's head that you heard. It was an internal monologue in the film, which is internal monologues just are inherently hard to do well.
Sure.
Versus this film, though, they gave us what we needed to understand the motivation, but the characters wore those motivations, those emotions on their face with the acting and the way they would sort of position things. So I think that's a great call out. I agree with everyone around the table. I would say, this movie is being marketed as like the next Star Wars or something. I really think it does a good job at being the intersection between a Star Wars, a Lord of the Rings, and a Game of Thrones. You've got the politicking of the Game of Thrones. You've got the scope of Lord of the Rings, but you have just enough of the kind of space opera to feel like it's a Star Wars movie. And obviously the sort of hero's journey, chosen one is probably the closest to Star Wars. I always feel like Frodo Baggins is a little different, but anyway, like I feel like it's sort of if you find where all three of those things intersect, you get Dune or something that's pretty close to it. But honestly, I just think it's a great cinematic experience, like Daniel and Dalton said. The way that Denis Villeneuve knows how to hold a shot on an environment or a moment, he lets he's not snappy, he's not cutting to the next thing. The reason the scenes work and you feel the gravitas is because everything feels important. Oh my gosh, this Imperial ship is landing. What are the looks on the characters' faces? Where they aren't even really talking. They exchange a couple lines here and there, but you're just in one of the opening scenes. It's very long, very drawn out. There's not a lot of actual conversation, but you just feel the pressure being put on House Atrieus. You feel the importance of this task they've accepted, for example. But overall, I feel like it's a 4.5 star movie out of 5. I do feel, and we're going to get into it here a bit more in a second, but I do feel like the ending is somewhat abrupt. Not as bad as maybe like, Deathly Hallows Part 1 abrupt. Pretty close, but because I do feel like, Paul Atreides does have an arc. His arc does feel like it's hitting a point, a like checkpoint that feels like an appropriate stopping point spot, but just from like a plot momentum, it feels kind of weird because I did feel like the third act was probably the one that I struggled with the most in terms of pacing, and particularly the second time because one of the benefits of the accessibility is I watched it in the big screen and then watched it again at home 2 days later, which is kind of nice. But no, I think this is a triumph of cinema. Like we are currently living in a reality where about to sound like Marty Scorsese here, where superhero movies are taking over. But I mean, the reality is superhero movies are what make money. They're the only things that are, especially post-pandemic, seem to be bringing in the crowds. So it's exciting to see that Warner Brothers backed this movie after Blade Runner 2049, another movie I loved that didn't make a ton of money, and believed in it enough for us to have a complete picture that is clearly a passion project from Denis Villeneuve, and it shows through all the details. So that said, it's a great movie. Now, of course, let's hone in on this part 1, part 2 thing, because I do think it's really important for people to know, if they haven't seen the film yet, that this is part 1. So without being specific about the ending, I do just want to get you guys' take from around the table. Do you think this is a complete story? Say part 2, Bless the Movie Gods, got greenlit 2 days ago. But when this movie released on Friday, we didn't know that. So do you think if we had never gotten part 2, this would have worked as a standalone movie? And Dalton, we'll start with you.
I think we were always going to get a part 2. That feels like a Warner Brothers marketing thing to get people out to theaters.
Thank you.
No, I mean, it's just so big. It's so much movie. They built so much shit.
Look at all this movie.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I feel like there's no way. Now, it would have been funny. Yeah. Oh my God, it would have been so funny. As much as it would have made me sad, it would have been cosmically funny in just a weird and sad way. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like this buttons up Paul Atreides' story. At the very least, it is an ending without spoiling anything. We are approaching what is a time jump in the novel, and so just from a structural standpoint, I think it makes sense to go ahead and take a break before that happens. Ending your movie on the line, this is only the beginning, is a big swing. Yeah. And I think that is cool, and I like it.
Very cool. Very cool.
Just don't put that line in your trailers.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, so, Caleb, you've alluded to this. Did any of you not know that this was a part 1 of part 2? I've started
I
to find
assumed
out.
it was, but I read the, just knowing the novel.
I knew this was part 1 of part 2. My girlfriend Lauren did not know this. My brother-in-law, who has been hyping this movie for over a year, did not know this.
Okay, so this is just news to me that I'm finding out that this was not common knowledge.
No, it was like there were people who aren't constantly reading movie news all the time who did not know that this was like a part 1 of part 2. My brother-in-law sends me a text. He's like, I had no idea. He's like, I got 2 hours into the movie and was like, how are they going to get to the rest of this in 40 minutes? Like he legit,
Okay.
So, and I've talked to some other people, via work, and they're saying like, oh, I just didn't know.
Yeah, flashing up that part 1 at the start of the movie is huge. Yeah. I think that does the movie a lot of favors.
So speaking though, I mean, you raised the sort of the possibility that this was all a marketing ploy by Warner Brothers. Wouldn't surprise me, but it just feels like most of my doubt came from Blade Runner 2049 not performing super well. A movie that I loved.
Well, as I understand it, that had a lot to do with why they wouldn't greenlight 2 right up top, right?
That's the narrative.
Like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So originally, for some context here, we'll get back to takes around the table. So Denis Villeneuve pitched them filming back to back, Lord of the Rings or the Matrix sequel style, and then releasing them, 2 years, like a year apart or whatnot. And then Warner Brothers, after Blade Runner 2049 tanked, they were like, what if you just did the first one? And we'll see how it does.
Well, and I've heard him saying now that he's glad they didn't go back to back. I've heard him say like that was just been too much movie.
Yeah, and he described it as it allowed him to focus and hone in on getting this one right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't think it's for the worst. I mean, we're getting a part two.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a marketing ploy, though. I've heard something worth considering. Joe, does it work on its own? You don't know the novel?
As its own on a movie, as a movie rather. I mean, it gets to a point where the movie is a certain length where you expect it to end. And I think that the point that it does end is natural for me. Having gone in knowing this is part 1 of 2, if you didn't know that, I really would be interested to know how you felt at the end of the movie, I guess. I just didn't even consider that was... again, maybe a perspective that you go in with, but it's so much story and it's so much movie that I don't know. It's 2.5 hours over that, and going in and getting to that point and then ending where it does. I don't know how I would feel if I didn't know if there was a part 2. I do feel knowing that there is a part 2, and now that we're getting it, I do feel that it ends in an organic spot, and I think that in terms of Paul's journey, it makes sense. But yeah, I don't know how I would feel if I hadn't known that there's a part 2. I feel like maybe I would feel a little cheated. I don't know. That's really interesting. I have never really thought of that.
I just wonder why they didn't market it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because maybe that was part of the whole marketing tactic to get people out. Like, this might be the only Dune you get, sort of thing.
I feel like the marketing is really interesting too, because I've seen people who have pointed out that Zendaya's involvement is so minimal. I think she's in the film for like 7 minutes, but they really, really push her as integral to this film, and she is not. So I don't know how people feel who are not like really involved in either like film news, like you said, or just like reading about the universe. So it's, I don't know. I don't know if I would feel cheated or surprised, but I'm happy with where it ended as a viewer in that world.
Very curious how high school students going to see Dune feel coming out of it.
Yeah.
Truly want to get the Zoomer takes.
Zoomers, you can send us your takes, the Cinematropolis at gmail.com. But actually, that's not a very Zoomer way to contact us. You can also just tweet at us in a video at Cinematrop on Twitter, because do Zoomers use email?
Whip us up a TikTok.
That feels like phone calls for them, right? I don't know.
Phone call-
I'm out of touch, man. I don't know.
I don't know.
Phone calls? What the fuck is that?
Daniel, bring this home here. Did you feel like this worked as a complete film?
I'm going to dig into one of my criticisms a little bit to do that. First of all, I think it was really good, but like I have the background of the novel, and the novel does present a very logical stopping point. I also think one of the biggest red flags, but criticisms of Lynch's novel is that it tries to encapsulate the entirety of Dune. The entirety of Dune is a like 5-hour movie or a 6-hour movie or a television series or whatever. It's not, I'm not gonna say you can't. We've got a lot of timeline left for somebody to make a more succinct, maybe there'll be a 25-minute Dune, who knows? But I think it does it really, well enough. It concludes at a logical place, but to Joe's point, Zendaya Chani is a part of it, but she's very minor. I think Zendaya was like on set for like 7 days, if I heard correctly. I mean, on set. She does do some narration throughout the film. I think maybe just at the start, though.
Yeah, just
at the start.
That prologue,
so, yeah. So that, and it doesn't have to be like that. This film, and this is a criticism that I'd say very lightly because it's a very fine line between maybe ruining an adaptation and doing something very experimental and interesting in this film, does not narratively deviate. Very much. It does things to make it
You're
succinct.
absolutely right. It kind of it moves some things around, but overall it's pretty it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it does
the highlights.
Right. And it does things creatively succinct. Explaining mentats does it like almost entirely visually and so well.
So well.
Yes.
There's so much weird and obtuse shit in Dune. I try to explain Dune to my wife, and my buddy Alex Sanchez has been making this joke that this has been a big week for the wives and girlfriends of Dune fans. I tried to explain it and like got very lost in my own bullshit. And then watching the movie, it's like, oh yeah, there's so much stuff you don't really need to understand like what's cool about Dune.
Mentats are explained in like 6 seconds.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it's entirely visual and it's incredible. So that's good. But I do think there's an opportunity for experimentation. I think in the fact that you're going to illustrate, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but like visions and prophecies and dreams, there's an opportunity to explore characters in that way. I mean, Zendaya is featured in that, but it's all kind of a nothing. It's like a few second clips. And I think there might be an opportunity to expand upon that, especially since prophecy is such a critical.
Dune's weird.
Yeah.
Dune is druggy. Dune is trippy. And I'm sure that there's a lot of that. And I know that there's more of that to come based on the story to be told. But I'm with you that I feel like there could have been more weaving those elements into the film. Although, again, we don't know. We're judging half of a movie at this point. So it's hard to say.
Exactly. And we'll keep that in mind.
But I am with you that I think that there is I don't know. I feel like there's something missing with that element of the film. Absolutely.
So I think of some of my favorite adaptations, and I think of like what Ridley Scott's Blade Runner did for Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. That is that is an enhancement of the original story, ultimately, sure. I think the same. We were talking briefly before the podcast about Alex Garland's Annihilation, what it did for Jeff Vandermeer's novel. I mean, both of them are exceptional in their own unique ways. That is more of an impression of a novel rather than it's technically an adaptation, but, and I think, there may have been an opportunity for that with Dune. That being said, that's a really fine line, and it's hard creatively or as an artist to try and define when it's appropriate to deviate and when not to. When creating this, which Dune, I would argue it might be a lot more closer to people's hearts than, something like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or maybe even Annihilation as well. Definitely. I mean, it's one of the most popular science fiction novel, but really any piece of intellectual property ever. So with that in mind, yes, it still works. I do kind of feel almost bad for someone who's not familiar enough with the novel to know that there's this very clear stopping point to where you could at least wrap up temporarily the story. But does it work okay? Yeah, I think it does.
Can I ask really quickly, do you think that it would have worked better as a series?
I wonder that. There's a lot of things I think of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. And I don't want to bring up James Franco too much, even though he's trying to adapt it, thankfully. He probably never will. But I do think, yeah, I actually think so. But then again, as a series, would it have Oscar Isaac? Would it have Dave Bautista? Would it have
Would
Timothée
Worm be
Chalamet?
so big?
Would Worm be large enough?
Yeah,
probably not. I would not be satisfied with the size of that worm. I need jumbos.
Big worm boy.
I need big worm boys.
Yeah,
I get you. Yeah. So yeah. But I mean, in a world where none of that matters, we could have the same cast. Because the other thing is that just the casting is great. If we could have all that, a television series, yeah, absolutely.
And can I say, almost everyone in that cast is so attractive.
So dreamy.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of hotness.
Oh yeah,
a lot of hot people put in a lot of hot costumes.
Yes.
Honestly,
yes.
Come on.
Honestly, even Stellan Skarsgård, he
could.
I love that man.
Right.
I love that character. I love his little floating thing going on. I think I told my husband, I was like, I would be that character. I love him.
It's to float around mysteriously.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
The Baron is cool. I like a lot of choices they made with the Baron.
There is a critical one. When we get into the spoiler one, there's one that's
sure, but it could have been extremely fat phobic, and I don't think it comes across that way at all.
No,
he just comes across as big and scary.
It's overindulgent, you know.
Yeah, a little bit, sure, but like it doesn't get. I don't know. There's such a fine line you're walking if you're going to play in that sort of very well trod trope. And
Right.
I don't think it does.
Villeneuve understands that evil doesn't need to be gratuitous. Like
Yeah,
you can,
yeah.
you know.
Right.
So
One of the big differences between this and the David Lynch film, I would say, actually, the approaches to the Baron.
Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Much more over the top and theatrical. And yeah. Okay, well, I think, you know, I feel better. I'm actually going to be a lot less critical on the ending because I know we're getting part 2. My whole thing was like, oh my God, if this is it makes logical sense, but it feels a little abrupt. That said, I'm excited to see where we're going next. Now, we're going to jump into the spoilers. We have a few different themes, and we're just going to talk about, take a little deeper dive into. But before we get there, firstly, is there anything else? We mentioned the cast. Is there anything else as a review, spoiler-free review that you would like to mention for listeners today about Dune Part 1?
Can I just say some images that are cool?
Yes.
The Sardakar's slow fall. What just a haunting thing to see. Just cool. The Gurney Halleck led charge with the exploding ships, like hitting the ground, and like you see steel buckle. Like it feels so tactile and real. Like, and that's again, I feel like one of the big strengths of this movie is nothing feels too effectsy. Things feel, you know, they're using a lot of miniatures and bigatures, and like you feel that tactile element on screen.
It's the perfect, and I think Christopher Nolan said this at some point this week, I think somewhere. It's like the perfect marriage between practical effects and the CG.
Yeah, it's
like
great
the
stuff.
CG all makes stuff like the shields, like
Yeah.
such a low key
The
thing.
worm is a completely visual effect, and it looks great. So like it just it's a very judicious use of special effects and remembering like what they're good at and what they're not good at. I was with the entire ceremony of handing the planet Arrakis over to the House Atreides, like that just is full of cool costumes and
And the bagpipes.
Oh yes,
God.
say
great.
slap.
100% more bagpipes in this film than
Yes.
I expected.
yeah,
It was great.
we love it.
I also just, and I know this is inherent to the novel, but just seeing a film in which you're in a quote unquote futuristic sci-fi universe where everyone's using swords to fight,
It's cool.
it's awesome. I thought it was great. Love it. Every time Jason Momoa is on the screen, he's not there a lot, but when he is, very good use of both his charm and his physical, his ability to, I don't know, kill motherfuckers. I don't know.
Yeah, just absolutely murk people. Yeah, sure.
I do want to add. I don't have much to add, but to parlay off of Dalton, as far as images are concerned, that are still relatively spoiler free. There is a shot that involves the Baron, and he's entirely out of focus.
Yeah.
And he's like basically this like faceless shape, and he never comes properly into focus, I think, within that shot. But
That's
he's
his first scene, right? Where he's
No.
steam bath. Okay.
later. He's and again, I don't want to spoil it. So, but he's basically well, this doesn't spoil it. He is floating across a long table,
Gotcha. Okay.
and that he's entirely out of focus the entire time. But it's just this amorphous, ominous shape coming basically towards you, and that image just sticks with me almost more than any other image I can think of in Dune, save a few we'll get to. But yeah, again, this if he's just so good.
That's why he's my boyfriend.
Yeah,
Again, I just think Denis Villeneuve totally understands the power of lingering on it, like setting up a cool shot and
Exactly.
letting it just like go.
Oh, yeah.
And not cutting around and stuff. So great. Joe, anything else you want to add?
I think that the one moment that's really sticking out to me, I think that someone touched on it already, is just like the arrival on Arrakis and like the beat that it takes with the ship door opening and the light hitting them and the wind hitting them. It's so, as you said, I think tactile, and you really feel it and you feel the weight of that moment. I think that those are the beats that really landed with me the most, where it's like you feel the importance of the thing that they're doing and why it matters to them as a family and to the story. So I really appreciated those kind of moments, because I think that most other filmmakers would kind of gloss over that and move through it, and it wouldn't be like a beat like that in a story like this.
Right. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because bring it back to the cast. The other thing I would add there, and it relates to what you just described, is the fact that they're able to quickly establish extremely believable relationships very shorthand, very quickly. Like, I believe, Paul Atreius and Leto Atreius, that relationship in one scene. You just really feel it,
You know what you're making me think of right now is Seven Samurai. The way Kurosawa just it's got a huge cast. It has to get through, and each scene so quickly and economically establishes who each person is. And I think Dune manages to do that. It's a big cast.
Yeah,
there's a lot of characters to explain, and it does so judiciously. It's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listeners, of course, that's going to bring us to our grade of the film. I moved away from, just for listeners who've been tuning in for a while, we're moving away from the how would you watch it stream theatrical, because post-pandemic it's a lot more complicated. So we're going to give this a rating of an A, B, C, D, F scale. So Daniel Bokemper, I'll start with you. What letter grade would you give Dune Part 1?
I think B, with the caveat that knowing Part 2 is eventually coming, it may appreciate a little bit. Somewhat similar. I've seen this discussion too. The Fellowship of the Ring. That film, I think, gets a little bit better as a part of a series. So I do think this has the opportunity to appreciate it. So again, I'm thinking a solid B with an asterisk. I will say, is it Villeneuve's best film? No, that's Arrival, I think, pretty clearly. Is it one of his best?
Interesting.
Do you? I will say,
I'm a 2049 guy.
That's what I was going to say. The second best, it may be between, Dune Part 1 and Blade Runner 2049.
Sure.
And I'm still chewing on Blade Runner 2049. I have not. I don't even know if I'd be comfortable giving it a letter grade so much so. But I do think Arrival maybe is just a tad better. I feel more. I feel like that film resonated with me a bit more, I should say.
I think they're both great for different reasons. I think this is where the power of the IP comes in, and you're like, but I love Blade Runner, so I like 2049 just that much better, just because I have the history with it. Because Arrival, I think, is a masterpiece, absolutely. Yeah. So that's a whole other discussion. We can also name off our favorite Denis Villeneuve films, because in my opinion, he hasn't made a bad film yet, at least not that I've seen. No. Dalton, Stuart, what letter grade would you give Dune Part 1?
Yeah, I similarly to Dan, I feel like it's fair to kind of give its grades with caveats, just because there is a whole second half of this movie coming. But yeah, like a B+ feels strong. The cinema score was an A-. I feel like audiences pretty much got it right. Like, there's a lot to like about this movie, and the things that there are to quibble about with it are like minor or to be seen if we got to be mad at the movie, right? Like, because it could depreciate as well as easily as it could appreciate. But I suspect if the bar that's been set by this first movie is matched by the second movie, I'm sure we'll be talking about both of them for years to come. Yeah.
Excellent. Joe?
I think I would give it an A, just based on the time, those beats that he gave it. Even just like the close-ups on like that longhorn steer head. Like, just those small moments that didn't have to be in the movie, that are in the movie, to give a little bit of humanity to everything that's going on. And just, again, I think the scope of it is so beautiful. The score is beautiful. I think the performances are beautiful. And as someone coming into it not having read the novel, I think that I can appreciate a lot of what it's trying to do from an adaptation standpoint as well as a filmmaking standpoint. Just, it's so impressive, and it's so big, and it's so beautiful, that I think it's going to be one of the big sci-fi movies that we continue to talk about for years to come, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I would say I'm aligned with Joe. I'd give this an A. I mean, I felt like the ending was a little abrupt, but like the thing is, I felt like the movie was like such an A++, an A++ in most every other area. The cast, the visuals, the filmmaking, the attention to detail, the way they are able to immerse the audience in the world, it's something that I feel like only comes around every, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, where you just feel like you're seeing something that you've never seen before.
I want to go home.
And you may never see again.
I want to go home and watch it again right now.
Exactly. Right. You guys didn't know the post-watch party? It was after this.
At 2 hours, okay. We got it.
Yeah. Dune from the top.
But, and that's the sort of thing. Like I really do think this movie, imagine if we'd only gotten Fellowship of the Ring Part 1. Fellowship of the Ring was still like an unbelievable film that you're like, how did this get made? And I feel like this is in that same vein. I don't know if it's as strong as Blade Runner 2049, but that movie is just a very special movie. And maybe with the arrival of part 2, I'll feel a little differently.
Oh, I'm perfectly prepared for part 2 to be my favorite movie I've ever seen. Sure, yeah, I'm ready.
Well, and again, to what you guys said, maybe having that part 2 there will only enhance part 1 that much more.
Yeah.
And I will say, and Dalton mentioned something that made me think of something. If part 2 is even just as good as this one, they both will be better.
Yeah.
Like I can
it.
say that with confidence.
All right. So, listeners, go see this movie in whatever means you feel comfortable or can. If it's streaming, give them that stream play. If it's in the theater, give them that box office money. And just to close up before we hit the spoilers, we got a 2-year wait. They did announce the sequel is coming out in 2 years, which is actually faster than I expected. Not going to lie. But Villeneuve is sitting on a script. He says, I'm ready to go. Somehow they're going to figure out how to get all those actors back in the desert in time to make a movie. So in the meantime, while we're waiting, what alternate movie, television show, novel, video game, or other media recommendation would you give to our listeners who do enjoy Dune and want more of that sort of content? Joe, we'll start with you.
Oh man, I think we've already kind of touched on it. Arrival, as I think we've all said, is a masterpiece. I would say approach it with the mindset of when it came out, which was 2016, which is a very difficult time for a lot of people. But it's a beautiful film. It's a film about like cooperation and worldwide harmony. But it's also just a really good story. And then I think Daniel mentioned 2001.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with 2001. It's such a great, expansive sci-fi story. Beautiful man versus machine. I think those would be my main two. Those are two of my favorite movies, I think, of all time. So I would definitely point people to those.
Great recommendation. Oh, one thing, 2001, the word I was looking for earlier. You know what Dune has in common with 2001? Majesty. It's majestic. You know what I mean? Like that, just you feel like you're in awe of like something spiritual. That's how big it is. Dalton Stuart, what would you recommend?
I think this movie is an excellent commercial for Frank Herbert's Dune. Go read Dune. It's cool. If you like that, you should check out Dune Messiah. It's just people arguing about what Dune's about. It rules. If you ever read if you've ever come to the end of some big portentous work of fiction and thought to yourself, man, I'd love to just read about people arguing about what just happened. That's Dune Messiah. It kicks ass. I know it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but like there's something really cool about a novel that just says, hey, I know the last thing we did is full of themes. Let's talk about them. Because I want you to make sure, I want to make sure you're not missing the point, which is that messiahs are bad. You can't trust them. That's a wild premise to have, period. And to dedicate an entire book to it, I think is great. So yeah, if you dug this movie, you got 2 years, man. Like, get in. It's wild. It's good. This is only the beginning, as Chani tells us. Dune is weird. In ways that are sometimes gross. You know, he's a guy in the 60s. What are you going to do? There's not all of it's aged perfectly, but there is some big ideas, and a lot of them are really interesting.
Very cool. So just go out and read Dune. I think that's a great recommendation. Daniel Bokemper.
Yeah. So Joe and Dalton snag two-man recommendation. That's okay. I have more. I think for just a film. And I do agree, by the way, both of you, those are incredible recommendations. But Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
I think that one lines up pretty well with this.
It does.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's animated, so that's different. I'll skip to video games. So there's two that stick out in my mind. If you like the beauty of Arrakis, if you like the cinematography of Villeneuve, I think Journey on perhaps, what is it like? It's
PlayStation. It's on all the PlayStations.
It's on. I have it on
3, 4, and
PC.
5, and it's on PC
too.
Yeah.
So you can, and I know they've upscaled it to like 4K and stuff, so you can get a very beautiful experience that way. If you just like roaming around the desert, and then I will say if you're more into the crazy space opera, anything can happen, wild creatures. This is so far out of our timeline, and also I think a derivative of Dune. It would be. Warhammer 40K, sure. Dawn of War 2, for strategy guys specifically. Most of the Warhammer 40K games are not very good. That one is an exception.
That whole universe feels indebted to Dune.
It is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what I'm getting at. But and if everyone's playing like Back for Blood right now, and they still haven't gotten their 4-player cooperative first-person shooter fix, the developers of Vermintide are coming out with Darktide, the Warhammer 40K inspired 4-player cooperative first-person shooter thing. I'm sure there's a specific genre for whatever I'm describing, but that's coming out soon. So if you're not completely burnt out by playing games with your friends after Back for Blood, maybe Vermintide will still be something to dig into. And it's also kind of again, owes a lot to Dune.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the gaming recommendations. I'm going to start with a television show. If you have Apple TV Plus, you should absolutely be watching the Foundation TV show. It's not always a home run, but it is very similar to this, very big and ambitious. Again, it's yet to be determined whether or not it's going to be a home run, but adapting very dense, sprawling, foundational, but novel of science fiction for the screen. It's a challenge, and so far, I'm more compelled than I'm not.
And it's got Oklahoma's very own Lee Pace.
That's right. He's from Oklahoma. Thank you for knowing that. Not many people know that.
Oh, I know all the ones that are.
Lee Pace. Oh, my gosh. And also someone who I recently was called Prestige TV Daddy, Jared Harris.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorites.
He's so good. He's so good in everything. Yes. So excellent. If nothing else, you're going to walk away with excellent production values and A+ acting, and so far pretty solid writing. Again, I'm just interested to see how this is going to pay off. So check it out, Apple TV Plus, and also, by the way, Apple TV Plus is only $5, and initially I was a little skeptical, but we've got that.
It's only $5.
It's $5 a month.
Wow.
And
I steal it, so I wouldn't.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, if you can steal it, I mean,
You should. They don't need your money.
Apple, please
They're
don't
the most
take my
successful
podcast.
corporation in the history of corporations. They don't need your money.
Please don't take my podcast.
Don't take.
We did not say any of
Yeah,
this.
you can take my podcast, John. Don't touch Caleb's. He didn't say anything mean.
No, but seriously, yes. If you can, get access to it without having to pay for it, that's great. But there's also Mythic Quest, which I really enjoy, and then I know everyone's all about the other show with the mustache man, played by Jason Sudeikis. So he who shall not be named. Everyone's all about that show too. But anyway, I would say of the things you can watch on Apple TV Plus, Foundation, very much in the same sort of vein of Dune. For film, you guys have already said all the great ones, so I'm just going to throw out Tremors, the original, because it's lots of fun. It's got giant worms. Come on.
Worms is big.
Got Kevin Bacon, Worms. Come on. And lastly, video game wise, I'd say another franchise that is deeply indebted to Dune, StarCraft. Probably my favorite real-time strategy. Very, very good game, especially StarCraft 2. If you can ignore the fact that Blizzard published it, it's a great game. Very indebted to Dune. So those would be my recommendations. All right, listeners. So with all that said, we're going to go ahead and get into a spoiler-filled discussion where we're going to talk about some of these themes that are present largely in this film, but also in the novel as well. So if you do not want to be spoiled on Dune Part 1, go ahead and tune out now.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here, kneel.
How dare you use the voice on me?
But I have a few different topics I wanted to just throw at the table and see what you guys thought, because obviously Dune the novel has all sorts of very influential ideas that have actually been borrowed or stolen in multiple other science fiction films, television, you name it. We mentioned several of them in our recommendations section. So I think a question I have frequently is, what can this film do differently or better than the other films that have been made since the novel came out that were influenced by the novel? And on that note, I want to start us off with topic 1, which is just taking a look at how this film portrays the ecology and the environmentalism. Now, of course, the 1965 novel is considered one of the forerunners of environmentalist science fiction. So, question, I'll start with you, Daniel, on this one. How does this film speak specifically to these same ideas with more modern sensibilities than perhaps the original novel? You wrote a great piece on the website. Listeners can check that out at thecinematropolis.com. What do you think?
Yeah, and because I want people to read that essay, I won't get too in-depth into that. But in that same vein, I think not to say it couldn't do more, but I think it does do enough. It has a very steep challenge. I've mentioned we are in a post-Wall-E world. So it can be kind of hard to do something, I think, new and imaginative with that. When you're discussing ecology, Frank Herbert, 1965, there wasn't too much science fiction that was, tackling that subject, if any, that I can remember. I do point out specific examples in my essay. I do think, the interpretation of the Baron in this film, and him literally like steeped in pitch black oil, is a very telling image without like literally saying something. I think the reimagining of Liet Kynes is a very very important distinction. I think it does kind of enhance the original message. I think maybe it helps that ecologist plea to resonate both a bit more. And then I think there are more overt things, like in Arrakis, the design of Arrakis itself. We move from muted colors, but then you also have the twinkling, or the spice twinkling expanse that is Arrakis. And I think Villeneuve is really good at switching between the exhausted Arrakis and the bountiful Arrakis pretty much seamlessly. I also think the worms themselves, it's a subtle redesign, but we don't have the protruding tri-mandibles. We've got what looks like, to me, kind of an inquisitive eye.
You're definitely not alone. I've seen a couple of people make that point, that there's a moment in the film where it feels like the worm is watching.
Yes. And that, I think, is very telling when you have an aspect, a paragon of the environment literally staring you down.
Yeah.
And you are the, representative of basically what's killing that planet. So, to say that, I think it does without saying much. Again, are there things it could have done? Of course, but I think for now, I think this is the modern Dune, and I think it does and protects the ecologist plea of the original.
Thoughts from around the table? Anyone have anything they want to add about the ecology?
I think all of my thoughts are more relevant to the next thing you want to ask us about. But I do want to say there's a fun moment where, Paul is in awe and wondering, the Spacing Guild and the Lands Rat and all these important hooplas are coming to their planet. And all Duke Leto can think about is how much money this costs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really fun, small moment where the practicality of this person who knows that they were being sent to a planet that exists only to further his government's excess is, it's telling about Leto's character and about what the movie thinks is important, for sure.
Yeah. Joe, anything you want to add to that?
I think the angle that I would come at it from is sort of looking at it from that white savior perspective, which I'm sure has been addressed multiple times in many different outlets, but I think it's very telling that there's like an indigenous population, and then this person coming in as an outsider who is prophesied to be their savior, and again, kind of coming at it not having read this source material in depth. I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to address within our current environment. So I don't really have the insight to talk about that in depth, but I do think that it's pretty explicit in how it's addressed in the movie that the indigenous population is largely people of color, and then we have this like small Victorian frail child coming in and being like, I'm your savior. So I don't know if there's something to address there.
Oh, I think there absolutely is.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot hangs on how Dune Part 2 like deals with that large central question. I think the novel like really gets into that, but you're absolutely right. The movie makes some gestures towards it for sure, but I think a lot hangs on how the second half of this like addresses those issues, because so many tropes are deployed within Dune, and I think but I think it also inspired a lot of people to deploy them not so great over the next 50 years or so.
Absolutely. And I think we are going to get really in the weeds in the next topic, addressing imperialism, the white savior narratives, because I do think that is, even in this film, where I don't feel like the arc is complete. The movie is definitely hinting at certain things. The only thing I would say just about the ecological perspective is just, I do think, Joe, you're spot on about the timing. Whenever David Lynch made his Dune, I'm sure the message was resonated or did not resonate the way it did based on the current puns, the climate around the conversation, of the environment and industrialism and things of that nature. I do think that, we are definitely at a point in our own world. Again, I'm not an expert on, the environment, but it is, I think it was described like climate change was described as a national security threat this week. So like, it's certainly something that's top of mind. And I think this movie does a really good job at highlighting how in order for the dark, stormy, awful imperial planet to survive and thrive so they can build their armies, there has to be this other planet that suffers. But I do think it's going to take us really into topic number 2, which is the one that I definitely think somewhat hinges on part 2, but there's a lot of really rich ideas here about this idea of Western imperialism and the politics of the spice, the white savior narrative, because this film opens with a little bit of monologuing, and it's not from Timothée Chalamet. It's from Zendaya's Shani, where she asks the question, "Who will be our next oppressor?"
Cut to Timothée.
That's right.
Which I think is such a great way to open the movie. Yeah. Such a fabulous way to like tell you so much about what this movie thinks it's saying, which I think is cool.
So I guess the thing I would say here, and I'll open up the table, is this movie really, as I see it, is playing into the tropes of sort of the hero's journey, but it very subtly, that being one example, is sort of hinting at the fallibility of our hero. Also, like the way the prophecies are framed are not good. Like it's bad. It's not like him being a badass emperor looks ominous, not like heroic. Which I think there's something to be said about.
What
that
if becoming Luke Skywalker was actually the worst thing that could possibly happen to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's like afraid of it initially before the movie.
Somebody please help me.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to jump ahead too much, but this is like such a pivotal scene in the movie is the spice visions in the tent with Lady Jessica and Paul. It's so much of what this movie has to say about these narratives is in that moment, right? Is in that moment where he sees the future being laid out before him, and it's terrible. It's bad. It is no good. It's a holy war that with no end. And it's good that our main character like sees that and knows it is bad and knows that this is like the worst possible outcome. But that's what happens when you cultivate desert power.
But yet he embraces it by the end of the film.
Does he?
Well,
and I think that's
he leans into it.
Yeah, and and we'll see how they choose to handle a lot of other things. But it is interesting that at the very least the movie says this is something the protagonist is aware of and is having to deal with. And I think that that's a hard thing to do without beating the audience over the head with it. But I think the movie's pretty successful.
Yeah, so I mean, but obviously, this is I see sort of the white, savior narrative, this hero's journey, and imperialism very closely intertwined. Oftentimes, are closely intertwined. So in this case, our hero, as Joe already pointed out, comes from a different planet. He's some white dude, goes to a planet that is made up of largely brown people, so that his family is tasked with just harnessing their greatest, most valuable resource, that is their way of life, so that the imperial, the empire can continue to, it doesn't even seem it's thriving, surviving. Like it seems like it's actually kind of on the cusp of a collapse based off how they frame it up. So, I mean, like, what do you guys think about this idea of Western imperialism? Do you think it's handled with a good deal of nuance? Do you think it's still an open question by the end of the film?
I don't think it's a very open question. I actually think this, I would almost say the story, but by extension, the film does a really good job at, just because, and again, with the opening question of Chani, who will be our next oppressors. Just because you're nice, just because you're maybe on your surface benevolent, like Leto, if you're coming in to do the same thing and use the same mechanisms and the same materials and ultimately serve the same purpose as the Harkonnens, you're not different. You are the same. It doesn't matter if you're nicer. You're still exploiting something. And at the same time, one thing I think is really funny about the film, I will say it does a good job of maintaining the skepticism that the Fremen, the one that, well, I don't want to say the Fremen, but the Fremen that are a little bit more disconnected from the city, the ones that are actually living in Arrakis, despite all being fully aware of this very, very, very specific prophecy that's like kind of clearly pointing towards one person, they're still skeptical of Paul. And the thing is you can't, even if you're prophesized to be this leader, if you come in and you are still just exercising your privilege, if you are still benefiting from this empire, this kingdom, if you have not relinquish that, you really can't be anybody's savior, like without doing that, I think, or at least and I think the Fremen are kind of aware of that, and I do think this film conveys that idea very well, that in order to actually do something, to enact systemic change, you have to give up something pretty significant.
Yeah. Can I say, just from like in the outsider perspective of not having read the book, the idea of like the Bene Gesserit cultivating that prophecy for political gains over such a long period is so interesting to me.
Yeah, it's some of the coolest stuff,
It's
right?
so great.
So
Interesting. They're playing like 4D chess on like a grand epic scale.
We don't get it in the movie, but the Baron, actually no, it's not just the Baron. A couple of characters say, but there's this refrain in the novel: plans within plans. Like everybody's got things within things within things that they're trying to run on each other. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That Bene Gesserit stuff, we just like scratched the surface of it in the movie. There's a whole series coming to HBO Max. Hi, it's commercial time. But yeah, if you found that interesting, I guess we're getting a whole series about it, which would be cool. I imagine.
Sisterhood of Dune.
That whole like politicization of religion and prophecy, like you've been talking about, is just like, that's a whole other layer that is barely touched upon, like you said. And it's just so fascinating to think about a world being established with outsiders and them saying like, wait for this guy that's going to appear at any time, and here he is. And it's just so interesting that it's all been fabricated and planned ahead of time. And it's just, I think that's such an interesting exploration of religion and politics that the world of this movie barely touches upon.
Yeah, what's the line that Paul has? They believe what they've been told. He's definitely not into this idea that he's been. Anybody thinks he might be their guy. He's not into it, which I think is, again, pretty cool.
Pretty cool. Begs the question, how many prophecies were just fabricated for political gain?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Daniel, you about to say something?
No.
Okay.
I will say
You say what?
No. Sorry, I thought we were getting.
No, you're good. But okay, so I do think that there's going to be a lot more to dig into with part 2, and this is why it does feel. Part 1 in particular does feel like it really falls into the tropes. It leans into them with the little sprinkles of the sort of subversions we've talked about. So I'm personally really excited to see how they play it out in part 2 for the film. And Joe, we're gonna have to come back in a couple of years and hear what you think about it too.
Oh, I'm very excited.
So I'd also just want to kind of ask the question here. I mean, the politics portrayed in Dune. You know, what do you? How does this sort of differ from what we've seen in Star Wars or Star Trek or James Cameron's Avatar, for example? I guess James Cameron's Avatar has a little bit of politicking in it, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I think with like the powers that be, I think there's a bit more ceremony involved with it, even though Star Wars does have a lot of ceremony, but I think the dynamic is a lot more, I don't know if it's like traditional, but there's more of a like subservient, these subservient houses that are still trying to like get their own political power and try and maneuver and navigate the Imperium. But at the same time, there is, and in this film, a faceless emperor that presides over anything. It's just this omniscient, not really omniscient, but for the purpose of this film, it's just, there is a authority that exists that's kind of just being, and we're kind of played within it. I know part 2 will likely expand on. I mean, it kind of has to expand on this. I think quite a bit more significantly.
I've seen some concept art of the Emperor, and they certainly drew a guy that looks like Charles Dance in his little outfit. So that's all I have to say about that.
The hype.
Yeah, but as far as politics and maybe even some like contemporary political illusions, I just want to add this. Baron Harkonnen is like less than half a degree removed from Dick Cheney. He is Space Cheney. And I think the film does a really good job of conveying that.
A man of few words, callous. Well, I just think the reason I wanted to call out the politicking is because, as we mentioned earlier, like there's so much has been influenced by the Dune that has been covered in various aspects. But I feel like the politicking we see here is something we don't see, at least in big screen cinema, in this way to this degree often. Joe or Dalton, anything you want to add about politics in Dune?
I guess I would ask is, do you think that Dune is more cynical than something like Star Wars? Because again, I feel like I see in Dune a sort of nefarious element, where in Star Wars it's very pure and like there's good and there's evil, and there's not really a lot of politicking going on, like Caleb has said. It's just, it is what it is, and there's no really middle ground. Whereas in Dune, there's all these different influences going on and so much groundwork being laid for the story that we're seeing taking place. So I just wonder if there's like a little bit. I think that Dune is definitely more complex than Star Wars. So I'm just interested to hear that perspective, I guess.
You know, my first impulse was to say, yeah, it's more cynical. But as I started thinking about it, I wonder if maybe it's just more realistic about the nature of human history. You know, it knows that there are good actors and bad actors and people who kind of fall in the middle somewhere. And it accepts that history is nebulous and ever changing and kind of hard to get pinpointed down.
Right. And at the same time, too, into this film, unlike I think both the novel and then also Lynch's film, I don't believe does this, at least as well. To quote Macho Man Randy Savage, there's a lot of jaw-jacking and grandstanding. There's a lot of ceremony that really doesn't mean much. And there's a particular scene where Leto, moments before, Paul is kind of lamenting how this ceremony, it's all unnecessary and it's all bullshit. And like Leto, in applying his seal, confirming his obligation to go exploit Arrakis, he takes a moment to just look at Paul and be like, yeah, this is all kind of dumb, right? And cynical, but also, to Dalton's point, a lot more realistic, I think. And it's very, I appreciate it very much that Villeneuve did not just get lost in the like ceremony and the obligation and make these kind of characters that just do what they're designed to do. They can kind of see their place in the universe a little bit. They're a little more actualized, I think. And that helps this one quite a bit.
Which I feel like, I mean, there's some characters that I feel like we definitely don't get enough time with. Definitely feel short shrifted. Yeah. But there's so much ground to cover. Like, of course that was going to happen, but it could have very easily been even worse than that, right? It could have very easily turned into just an action movie. But I feel like all of us tonight have kind of hit on this, that it manages to preserve this core thread of like human interaction, human like interpersonal relationships. Like, it still is about how people feel about one another in almost every scene, which I think is a hard thing to do in a movie this big.
Right. And I love that we get multiple perspectives. Yeah. It's not just House Atreides. That would have been the easy thing to do. Okay, these are the heroes. These are the good guys. Yeah, there's going to be some gray water, but at the end of the day, we know they're the good guys. You walk away from this movie saying, I don't know, they might be the oppressors. We also get a lot of scenes with who in a lot of films we consider the bad guys. A lot of scenes where we're seeing they're scheming and they've got their own sort of like political game. Obviously, they're clearly evil. They look evil. They
got a weird spider thing.
They do. But I still appreciate that you have moments where you're like, okay, well, here's their motivations on the table. And also something that is not really that's always present, but not actually getting hardly any screen time in this film is the Imperials. They're really not in the movie. We have like one scene on the Imperial planet, right?
Yes. There's a name. I can't remember what it is. It's Salusa Secundus, some shit like that.
Oh yeah. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, the home of the Sardaukar. Yeah, yes. We get one planet, and that's not even like the political seat. It's just like a prison and military planet. Yeah.
Wow. So that's not even like the main.
No, that's just where the Sardaukar live.
So it almost feels like there's also this other unseen element. The Emperor's not in this film at all, but yet I feel like he's the bad guy. And if we were going to say there's a bad guy, it's the political mastermind who's pitting these two houses against each other on another planet that's harming the indigenous people, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because there's... Yeah, I think the Emperor could be seen as maybe the logical big antagonist. There is a character they're omitting, I think strategically from this film, Harkonnen. Is it Feyd Rotha? Feyd Rotha.
Yeah.
He is not in this film at all, but he is a pretty strong antagonistic force in Dune. So I suspect we'll see quite a bit more.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah, he's a character that doesn't do a lot in the first half of the book, so I think it makes sense that they kind of just shifted him to the end.
Yeah, and not to spoil like what he does and how he operates, but
Dave Bautista gets a scene that would have been his, and I think it works. Yeah.
Speaking of Dave Bautista, can't wait to see more of him in the sequel.
He gets to go full pro wrestler in one scene and just yell.
So great.
he didn't hit a Bautista bomb, but
I do miss him in very tiny glasses.
Oh, he was tiny glasses. Scene stealer, movie stealer. He's in one scene in Blade Runner 2049 with those things.
Scene of the movie.
So good. God. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here, and we hit on it a little bit in the review, is just the way in which this film portrays prophecy. I'm a big fan of prophecies when properly utilized, or properly is not probably the best word, when used effectively in a story. And I think this one does a really good job. Obviously, we don't see any of the payoff in this film, really. And there's a couple visions early on that pay off by the end of the movie. But like the grand scheme of Paul raising up this army and returning to his home planet almost as a conqueror sort of thing. And I love that they put in this doubt where you're sort of asking the question, is this going to happen? Is it a dream? And it also is sort of simultaneously driving him a little crazy. So I love that sort of Shakespearean approach to prophecy. So I just want to get you guys' take. Were you guys a fan on how Villeneuve and his team incorporated them into the story here?
Yeah, there's so much a bigger part of the novel. At the point of the story that part one gets to, it feels like I would have expected us to get more, but what we get, I think, works really well. I think the best example, and I'm really curious how you feel about this, Joe, just because, so we get a lot of scenes, or not a lot of scenes, but a couple of scenes where Paul is having a vision of this dude, Jameis, teaching him and being his friend, and then by the end of the movie, Paul has killed this guy. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, obviously, I know that Denis Villeneuve is trying to communicate to me that his prescient powers are not always 100% accurate. Did that work for you as far as like communicating that information?
I will say I did have to look that up because I was not sure if what he was seeing was the absolute future. And then looking up on like Reddit and things, I was like, oh, he's seeing also the past and like maybe seeing like a communal memory.
Yes.
But I did have to look that up. In addition to, I think the other thing that I looked up was like, is the sandworm laughing at him? Like, so I had to look up like two things, and those were the two things. But I was a little confused because I was not sure if the death was supposed to happen or if he had seen something incorrectly. But after having looked it up, I understand like he's seeing maybe someone else's memory. Is that accurate?
So I read it as, and I mean, again, this is all up to what Denis Villeneuve team decided that this means. But for me, it read as like, this is a possible future in which this guy does become his friend. And he's seeing the best case scenario, and that is not what plays out.
Yeah. I mean, that works for me too.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that.
But it definitely, yes, in the novel, especially later in the series, they get into family memory and stuff, and genetic memory.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's weird.
It's psychedelics. Yeah, I sort of took it as more of like the mix between he's having forward-thinking visions, but they might just be hallucinations, right? The spice activates like a part of his like psychic powers, you know, that is, as you say, a possible future that's not real, but it also simultaneously shows him things that are going to happen. So it's like
versions of things that will happen.
of things that will happen. Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, and I think when you're slinging around prophecies and destinies and putting them on people and assuming they have to do this specific thing, it's enough to drive you a little fucking insane. And I think this film, at least in parts, I maybe would have preferred it to go a little bit further, but it does capture the how unhinged you can become when you're when you have the pressure of a destiny. Made me think of, and this film maybe explores it a little bit deeper, but Ari Aster's Hereditary involves a prophecy on somebody who's about Paul's age. And that does not end, well, I guess it ends prophecy fulfilled, I guess, but I don't know if I want to say well. But like it
Spoilers, Daniel.
Yeah, I know, my bad. Hail Payman. But I think it does a really good job of capturing that. And I think just because it doesn't give us the full scope of the hero's journey or anything like that, it still gets the high notes we need, and films and stories can capture that really well. I mean, like, let's look at the David Lowery's The Green Knight. That's I think a segmented portion of a bigger tapestry, of somebody's life, and it does it well. I think it delivers that in a very effective manner.
Awesome. My other favorite part about prophecies is that people on the internet are going to be going crazy for the next 2 years.
Heaven forfend, they might have to read a book.
You're right. And I hear, and my understanding is, again, this is not a spoiler. This is me remembering what my friend in high school who had read all the books had said, that prophecies become an even bigger part of the series.
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. We start getting shit like the golden path, humanity's future. Yeah, it's great.
We talking big worm. But no, I don't want to.
Big worm.
Big worm.
Big worm. If you like worms.
Boy, do you get more worms.
You get more worms.
Yes.
More worms?
Yeah, yeah. There's infinite worms.
Yeah.
This is a big part of why I've decided to like dive further in, because I'm like, there's so much weird stuff I keep hearing about in like the later books, and I'm like, all right, I got to get through these first 4 and I'll be done. But the first 4 are apparently the ones that you got to get to.
Yeah.
And then you can stop after that, is sort of what I've been told.
Yeah, it's a shame. But, it is what I think he wrote. Frank Herbert wrote 6.
Yeah, he wrote 6.
And then his sons published a bunch of stuff since.
Yes, they closed out. Yeah, they closed out the series based on his daddy's notes. Weird relationship. I'm fascinated by Brian Herbert and his decision to continue his dad's legacy, because his dad was not great by all accounts.
Well, we'll have to wait to see how things play out in Dune Part 2. And Denis Villeneuve says his goal is to do to also adapt Dune Messiah. So
I had heard this.
He wants to do. He sees it as a trilogy: Part 1, Part 2, Dune Messiah. So
that feels like all you could reasonably do. Truly, everything else feels like you got to start going to HBO and doing TV shows at that point. I feel like.
Yeah, and I think some of the really I think iconic imagery that we're kind of joking about will probably. I would suspect it might make its way into a Dune Messiah adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's visual allusions to like much later stuff in the Dune lore in this movie. Daniel and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, but there's a great shot with Baron Harkonnen that anybody that's gotten super deep into the lore of Dune knows is sort of visually referential of a character later in the series. Anyway, it's cool stuff, and I'm sure Denis will continue to live little breadcrumbs for people who want to think about the sort of the larger story.
See, this is a great way to pitch this to Marvel fans. Be like, look, the Dune cinematic universe. You want to catch the Easter egg over here? You got to read the novel and watch the next 3 movies and the HBO show. Come on, let's do it.
Is the word Duneverse a thing?
Oh, it should be.
Now it is.
Here we go.
Just did it, yeah.
What's the name of Dune Part 2? Or how do you spell it on a poster? Maybe is a better way.
Tune.
Oh,
I believe was the Matt Singer tweet that I saw that I really liked was Tune. Yeah, Tune. Big fan of that one.
I gotta say, guys, Dune memes took off in a way I didn't expect they would. It's been great.
It's so good.
The title memes yesterday that were flying.
I'm just so glad the internet likes this movie.
Yes.
It's fun to watch people just unironically enjoy something together. That's just nice.
It's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, with all that said, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. I do want to give everyone around the table one last chance. And the spoiler gloves are off. Is there anything else you would like to add about Dune before we close out the show today?
Yeah, I'll add one thing, kind of just broadly. I think over the last year, maybe a lot of us, mostly because of the circumstances, may have fallen just a little bit out of love with film. I definitely fell an interest, I think, in film criticism and approaching film as a whole. And the prospect of this film specifically, and now many others, because we're getting so many great films that are coming out right now, it really kind of sparked something. It got me a lot more interested again and ready to talk about films in a critical way. And so I owe a lot, I think, to Denis Villeneuve for this film, because it did catalyze my interest in cinema again. And so for that, even though I gave it a B, which doesn't sound like something I would award the way I'm describing it right now, but for that, I think it's good. I think that this is a very clearly a passionate film, and one worth seeing.
Absolutely. Listeners, maybe if you enjoyed today's conversation, you want to keep up with all of the great insights and tweets that our guests are putting out there, like maybe Dalton's spice-related tweets. He's a very spicy boy right now. So, Dalton, where can people find the spicy boy tweets on the internet?
If you found yourself unfortunate enough to have a Twitter account, I guess you can follow me at Dal_Stu. I don't tweet very often, but I've been on a roll with some very dumb spice-related humor. But if you really want to know what I'm up to, you can subscribe to the Good Trash Genrecast on Apple, Stitcher. We're not on Spotify. It's not like a xenophobia against the Swedes thing or anything. It's just Podbean's RSS feeds are weird. No offense, Spotify lovers. That's what I use for most of my podcasts. But Good Trash Genrecast. We're everywhere else. We just got done doing a Shocktober 10. God, I can't believe it's the 10th time we've done this.
10 years. Congratulations.
Well, this won't be 10 years officially until next September, but thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be starting year 11 at that point. But yeah, it's the 10th time we've done a Halloween marathon, and we did a lot of the early aughts horror remakes that were so prevalent. We had a lot of fun trying to go in and get deep film analysis out of some not particularly deep movies.
I just recently listened to your 13 Ghost episode, because that's a movie I frequently think about, and it's not a good movie, but I frequently am like, that's a good movie to turn on right now.
It's got a lot of visuals that are just kind of interesting.
And you guys put a really interesting, because what you guys do on that show is very analysis driven, much like more like the second half of this conversation today. And you guys made me think about it in the context of 9/11, which I've never, ever done before. So anyway, great conversation, listeners. Check it out. Good Trash Genrecast.
Thanks, man.
Joe Light, where can people keep up with you and your work online?
You can follow me at Joe_Lightly on Twitter, and you can look at nofilmschool.com. I just did a couple of interviews with horror writer-directors that I'm really, really fond of. I interviewed Michael Kennedy, who co-wrote Freaky, which is an amazing horror comedy if you haven't seen that already, and then Scott Cooper, who directed and co-wrote Antlers, which is a really beautiful horror film.
Awesome. Check it out, listeners. And Daniel Bokemper, where can people keep up with you and all the things you're doing?
Yeah, I can't remember my Twitter handle. So, of course, check me out on the Cinematropolis.com alongside Caleb. Check out my most recent essay about the ecology of Dune, and if the ecologist message is preserved, it is, but still read the essay anyway. Likewise, catch me in the latest issue of World Literature Today. I have a review of Tahar Ben Jaloun's The Pleasure Marriage. It's kind of like a modern episode of 1001 Nights. Very, very insightful, very creative, and a little grim too, unfortunately, but still, again, definitely worth reading. But check out the review. Pick up copies of World Literature Today wherever you pick up your international literary magazines. Everywhere. Pretty much 7-Eleven, I guess. I don't know.
Excellent. Check that out. That's World Literature Today. Of course, you can find me on the internet over at the Cinematropolis.com. We were, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're on a bit of a hiatus while life circumstances recalibrate a little bit, but we're going to be back with at least 2 podcasts a month here for the rest of the year and into next year, and hope to get some more essays up on the website here pretty soon. So that's at the Cinematropolis.com. You can also find the Cinematropolis on Twitter and Facebook. Or you can find me personally on Twitter tweeting about films, video games, all the pop culture nonsense that I love. That's on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That is letter C Masters Talk. All right. Well, listeners, it's been so great talking with you about capital C cinema while we're discussing Dune. Tune in on our next episode when we'll be doing a review of Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch, because movies are back. And it's whenever I have to choose between The French Dispatch and then Last Night in Soho and Antlers, 3 movies I want to see very badly, it's a good time to be into movies. So check us out on our next episode. We'll catch you again next time.